The initiative itself was to support the Chief Financial Officers Act of 1990 originally. That says that the Department of Defense, like any other federal agency, has to account for its property, value its property, identify its property. And by property, we mean anything from, small equipment or IT equipment all the way up to howitzers and, Humvees and other pieces of military equipment. So we were focused primarily on the critical mission equipment, mission essential equipment, as well as anything for which we had to provide accountability, which basically meant $5,000 or more. That's what initiated it. But both Michael Wynn, who was then the principal deputy under and became the Undersecretary of Defense and then became the Secretary of the Air Force, understood as engineers that there was more to gain from simply accounting for property. So our focus quickly became enhancing logistics, using this connected information to make decisions to get parts in the right place at the right time and to buy them for the right price. All of which supported then future procurements of either contract logistics support or equipment that provided greater value to the department from a price per performance perspective. And then finally, towards the latter part of my time with the Department of Defense, leading the IUID initiative, was focused on predictive maintenance and being able to get a piece of equipment prior to its failing based on past performance and collected information, and be able to say, okay, it's time to change the generator on that piece of equipment because it will fail at a particular point in time. Once you got past the general, are you crazy? It really came down to, what is it going to cost? We think it's going to be a huge amount of money. I know particularly in the aerospace industry, which is very sensitive to cost and safety, there were concerns relative to the potential for it costing extremely large amounts of money, which came out obviously to be an overreaction. But the second was, what would it do to the parts that are physically marked to ensure that they are flight worthy, that they're not compromised by this marking? So the more we looked into the application technologies and explained those to industry, and industry in partnership with the Department of Defense and with NATO, which I chaired the NATO working group on item unique identification. Once we went through that process, people understood that we weren't going to compromise safety, that the physical marking could be chosen not to compromise safety, that the re-engineering or the engineering certification of the physical marking process wasn't something extraordinary. And the farther we moved down the process, that we could design it into the quality assurance procedures. So once that resolved itself to some degree, people understood that there were options, that it was merely a different way of marking, oftentimes using the same marking technologies, and understanding that it had to be applied in a particular place. The cultural resistance was really the primary factor. And then that comes from simply, you got to know what you don't know. You have to be able to train people on what the impact is and get the physical marking right, get the data submissions right. It took literally years to get to the point where the physical marking was accomplished and the data was provided when it needed to be provided as part of the receipt and acceptance process. That took years. We've issued the first initiative announcement July 29, 2003. All new procurements beginning January 1, 2004 were impacted. The requirement was placed in the contracts. And I say that knowing that that's not really true. The requirement was there, but the systems hadn't caught up to it. The contract writing systems, the procurement training, all of that had not caught up to getting the clauses in the contracts. So it took literally years to get the contracts impacted directly by putting the clause that required IUID compliant marking and IUID compliant data provision to the Department of Defense. I think oftentimes we think standards are there to restrict and to control change. But the more I've been involved now, almost 20 years, it's really there to guide transformation, to guide change. And I think that the people involved in the process aren't barriers. In fact, they're sounding boards for improvements. So if you've got the technology community behind the standards on your side and working with you, the end product will be much better than if you establish this requirement without looking at standards. One of the major driving forces in any AIDC, but specifically item unique identification, was that we engaged both the user community and the production manufacturing community, as well as the standards community, coming up with what we at the time called the collaborative solution, which is a single way of physical marking across information domains in the world today, whether they be retail, whether they be what we think of in the defense industrial base as the common industry practices, and as well as consumers. So and by consumers, in my case, I mean the soldiers, sailors, airmen in the field, as well as people like myself and others who were trying to gain direct benefit from that information.